For melee factions like Beastmen, rushing is a very direct way to counteract artillery boxes like the Skaven army here. However, there are some mistakes you can make that render your rush a lot less effective or even completely failing. And today we'll be looking at some of these mistakes here. For the army build here, we have the Beastmen with a front line of Ungor spears mixed in with Bastargors, backed up by Goreherds, some Ungor raiders, and a Jabberslave regiment of renowned Brute Mother, Minotaurs, a Gore Bull, and in the skies we have Feral Manticore, Malagor the Dark Omen. Scattered around the battlefield, we have the Chaos Warhounds with Poison, Razorgore Herd, and also a single Tuskor Chariot on the corner. As for the Skavens here, we have a front line of Skaven slaves and a bunch of artillery, including Poison Mortars, Nutty Bobo's Sharpshooter, protected by a bunch of Skaven slave spears, and Red Ogres, one of them the Pit Fighters. Also, we have an Ixchios Triads hidden in plain sight with their stock ability, and a couple Warp Lightning Cannon already firing at the poor Tuskor Chariots. For spell support and leadership, we have the Warlock Engineer as well as the Gracier of Plague. Now, let us begin the battle in normal speed and talk about what kind of stuff you need to avoid in battle when you're trying to rush. So the first big mistake of the Beastman player is made in the deployment, starting before the battle even began. With all these units scattered around the corners of the map, there is no immediate threat and pressure onto the Skaven frontline, allowing ample time for all these Warp Lightning Cannons to turn around and blast away at these poor Tuskor Chariots already routing off the battlefield, a massive loss for the Beastman player from the beginning. If I were the Beastman player, I want to deploy my melee troops as close to the army of my opponent as possible. The first line will be here with all these Vanguard deployment, Ungor Spears, Goreherds, Ungor Raiders, just so I can get into my opponent's face as soon as possible. And the Bastargor Herds and Minotaurs who do not have Vanguard deployment will be on the edge of the regular deployment zone. All the marching before engaging in melee is just exposing your units to enemy ranged fire, so the less distance the better, since you want your troops to spend less time in melee and more time hitting their enemies. Now here comes the second mistake of the day on the Beastman side. As Malagor the Dark Omen and Feral Manticore rushing in to the middle of enemy formations, while the infantry of the Beastmen here are still slowly waddling forward, unable to provide any support or distract these Warp Lightning Cannons or Natty Bobo's Sharpshooter from shooting at the poorly pinned Malagor the Dark Omen. You can see a lot of mobility are not in the position of disrupting all these Warp Lightning Cannons as well. Razorgore Herd is still quite far away, and same goes for the Chaos Warhounds with Poison. And for the infantry, of course, they are not even close to the middle of the Skaven formation. So what happens is all these Warp Lightning Cannons getting some beautifully clean shots onto Malagor the Dark Omen, while the Natty Bobo's Sharpshooter able to get a few shots popped before being charged by the Razorgore Herds. Unfortunately for the Skaven, the Natty Bobo's Sharpshooter are not exactly well protected by the Ixchios Triads. So these Razorgore Herds will still be able to take down an expensive artillery unit, albeit the cost is their own lives, and the Beastmen have lost a lot of their mobility assets. And now here comes the third mistake here with Gorebull and the Minotaur. Seeing the Warp Lightning Cannon such a great threat, they are forcing themselves through the enemy infantry line, away from their own infantry support, and plunging themselves straight into backline combat. While there is a chance for them to silence the artillery, this is actually a very bad idea. Despite the combat power of Gorebulls and Minotaurs, their large model size and the low unit entity count makes them rather susceptible to being surrounded by cheaper units like all these Red Ogres hounding them in the face and dishing out massive damage against the poor Gorebull here, already down to less than half health and quickly routed away. Sure, there is a Cygor summon from Malagor, but that is not enough to help. The Beastmen monsters were not able to use their full potential. When you're rushing with monstrous infantry like the Minotaurs and also monstrous hero, you'd always want them to be supported by some kind of infantry troops like these Ungor Spears here, who are unfortunately pinned down by a beautifully summoned Clan Rat. If the Ungor Spears were present, they would be able to synergize well with the Minotaurs absorbing hits for them, while the Minotaurs will be focusing on dishing out the pain against the Skaven resistance. But alas, that was not the case, as the Minotaurs are dragged down by the filthy red ogres. And now even the Brute Mother, charging into combat but without any infantry support, are surrounded by a bunch of pit fighters who are in top shape, possibly berserking already, with a little bit of extra damage boost. Well, the Brute Mother is not enjoying this at all, and the poor infantry, the Gore Herds and Ungors and also some of the Bestigors, they are not able to cleanly wipe out all these Skavens due to the lack of monstrous support, who are always distracted away, trying to plunge into the backline but instead getting isolated and picked apart. Now today we won't be showing you the entire battle because, spoiler alert, the Beastmen lost the game. Instead, let's go over 3 issues that we point out this video when you're attempting to rush your opponent. The first thing you need to do is to get close to your opponent. The closer the better. Since with a rushing army, the longer you spend marching to your opponent, usually you take more damage from all kinds of missile troops, including artillery, missile infantry, and even skirmishers on horsebacks. That's why you want to deploy your army as close to your opponent as possible. Sometimes people even bring full Vanguard army and chuck them right on the edge of the Vanguard deployment zone so they can start charging their opponent's front line as soon as the battle begins. And now, after closing in that distance between you and your opponent, the next thing you have to do is to attack on all fronts. That means you need to muster all available troops and attack your opponent's formations from all viable angles. Make sure all your units are attacking at the same time and not sent in piecemeal. Otherwise, your opponent will have an easy time focusing down your troops one after the other. This have a bit of demand in your micro skills, but if carried out successfully, can force your opponent to expose certain weaknesses in their formations or even causing them to make micro mistakes. Now for the third part, when you're rushing with monsters just like the Beastmen in this battle, avoid isolating them from their own infantry support. Sure, the backline missile troops might look threatening, but you still don't want to send in some of your monsters alone just to distract them. An isolated monster is a vulnerable monster, prone to being surrounded by enemy defensive units and get dragged down. Certain monsters with enough mass and a disruptive animation can be exempted from this rule, for example the Dreadsaurian, War Sphinx, and maybe the Jabberslave. But for monstrous infantry like Gorbull and Minotaurs, who can be easily pinned in by cavalry and anything with a bit of mass, you'd want to keep them in the safety well protected by the meat shields of your chaff units. To sum up, rushing isn't simply about getting your units into your opponent's face. It needs proper preparation and coordination to work. Of course, a lot of veteran players already knows this, but I feel like this will be an interesting tip video for newer players to the multiplayer scene. So viewers, I hope you enjoyed this video, and also I won't be going into the post-battle screen because, well, I did roast the Beastman player for quite a bit during this video. And roasting players is one thing, but roasting them and revealing their gamer tags without permission is a whole nother. Though I do want to say a big thanks to Doomsage, who is the Skaven player, for sending in this replay. That was a quite good example of what not to do when you're trying to rush your opponent. Anyways, that's gonna be all for today. Viewers, remember to hit the like and subscribe to keep an eye out on new video uploads on the channel. I'll be covering more tips and strategies for Total Warhammer multiplayer like this video, battle replays, or some wild meme army builds that you do not want to miss out. So yeah, that's gonna be it, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.